To the outside world, Jacob and Jessica Miller had the perfect, simple life. They lived in a modest suburban home, drove reliable but unremarkable cars, and clipped coupons for their weekly grocery trips. Jacob was a diligent data analyst at a mid-sized logistics firm, and Jessica was a part-time librarian who loved the quiet comfort of her books. They were a portrait of ordinary happiness, a love story, built not on grand gestures, but on shared laughter over burnt toast and cozy nights on a well-worn couch. But beneath this placid surface, Jacob was guarding a secret of staggering proportions, a secret worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He thought he was protecting his wife, their marriage, their very happiness. He was wrong. He had no idea that the woman sleeping beside him every night was about to give him the shock of his life. The life Jacob Miller had constructed was a masterpiece of deception, built with the precision of an architect and the paranoia of a fugitive. Their two-bedroom house on Maple Street in the quiet town of Westfield was chosen specifically for its unremarkable nature. It was the kind of house people drove past 1,000 times without ever truly seeing. The beige siding, the neatly trimmed lawn, the slightly faded welcome mat, it was all part of the camouflage. Inside, the furniture was comfortable but dated, bought from mid-range department stores during holiday sales. Their life was a carefully curated exhibition of mediocrity. To Jessica, this life was authentic. She had met Jacob at a local coffee shop 5 years ago. He'd been wearing a worn-out denim jacket and had a shy, kind smile that reached his eyes. He told her he worked in data entry, a stable but unglamorous job. He was steady, reliable, and his love felt like a warm blanket on a cold day. She had never been a materialistic woman. Growing up with parents who valued experiences over possessions, she craved stability and genuine connection. Two things Jacob seemed to offer in abundance. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Jacob would leave for his office at 8 in the morning, carrying a thermos of coffee and a packed lunch. He'd complain about his demanding but dull boss, Mr. Henderson, a fictional character Jacob had invented with a surprisingly detailed backstory. He'd talk about pointless meetings and the tedious task of sorting spreadsheets. Jessica would listen sympathetically, rubbing his shoulders as he sighed about the monotony of corporate life. She would then share stories from her part-time job at the Westfield Public Library, tales of quirky patrons and the joy of discovering a dusty, forgotten classic. But Jacob's reality was a world away. After driving his 10-year-old sedan for 20 minutes toward the city, he would park it in a designated spot at a multi-level garage. From there, he would take a private elevator to a sleek, unmarked sub-level. A short walk through a sterile corridor led him to another vehicle, a gleaming black Audi A8. He would then drive to the gleaming glass tower of Miller Industries, a global technology conglomerate he had inherited from his grandfather. He wasn't Jacob Miller, the data analyst. He was Jacob Miller, the CEO, and sole heir to a fortune valued at over $900 million. His office, a sprawling suite on the top floor, offered a panoramic view of the city skyline he claimed to despise. His desk was a massive slab of polished mahogany. His chair was Italian leather, and his days were filled with high-stakes negotiations, board meetings with corporate titans, and decisions that could shift markets. His boss, Mr. Henderson, was in reality his board of directors, and his spreadsheets were complex financial portfolios that spanned continents. This elaborate charade was born from a deep-seated trauma. Jacob's father, a brilliant but soft-hearted man, had been a victim of a ruthless gold digger. Jacob had watched as his mother systematically drained his father's spirit and his bank account, her affection turning to ice the moment the money began to dwindle after a series of bad investments. The divorce had been a brutal public spectacle that left his father a broken man. From that moment, Jacob equated wealth with poison. He believed it corrupted everything it touched, especially love. He promised himself he would never make the same mistake. He would find a woman who loved him for him, the quiet, simple man he presented to the world, not the 9-figure number attached to his name. When he met Jessica, he felt he had found her. Her genuine warmth, her lack of interest in luxury, and her contentment with a simple life were everything he'd been searching for. So he doubled down on the lie, believing it was a necessary shield to protect the purity of their love. He loved her with a fierce, protective intensity, and in his mind, the lie was his greatest act of love. He was protecting her from the curse of his wealth. He was ensuring that their bond was real, untainted by the corrosive power of money. He just never stopped to consider what would happen if his carefully constructed world ever came crashing down. He never imagined that the foundation of their perfect, simple life was a lie that could break the heart of the one person he was trying to protect. It happened on a Tuesday, a day as ordinary as any other. Rain lashed against the windows of the house on Maple Street, and the grey sky seemed to press down on the quiet suburb. Jacob was away on one of his business trips, a supposed data analytics conference in Chicago. In reality, he was in Zurich, finalizing a multi-million-dollar acquisition. Jessica was enjoying the quiet solitude of the house, a rare treat. She decided to tackle a task she'd been putting off for months, cleaning out the small, cluttered study Jacob used for his work-from-home days. The room was a testament to his fabricated life. A clunky, outdated desktop computer sat on a cheap particle board desk. Stacks of files filled with dummy paperwork and printed-out spreadsheets gave the illusion of a man buried in mundane tasks. As Jessica dusted the bookshelf, her hand brushed against a thick, leather-bound portfolio that was tucked away behind a row of worn-out paperbacks. It looked out of place, too expensive and elegant for this room of carefully chosen mediocrity. Curiosity piqued, she pulled it from its hiding place. It wasn't locked. Her heart gave a little thump as she opened it. The first page was a summary sheet from a company she'd never heard of, Northwood Capital Management. Her eyes scanned the document, her brain struggling to process the words. Client Jacob D. Miller. Account value. She read the number once, then twice, certain she was misreading it. The string of zeros seemed to stretch into infinity. It wasn't a few $1,000s saved up. It was an 8-figure sum. Her breath caught in her throat. This had to be a mistake. A typo. Maybe it belonged to his father. But the name was his. The address listed was a P.O. box in the city she knew he kept for business mail. She flipped the page. More statements. Stock holdings in dozens of blue-chip companies. Bonds. Real estate investments in New York, London, and Tokyo. The documents painted a picture not of a mid-level data analyst, but of a financial titan. Jessica sank into the cheap office chair, the papers trembling in her hands. A cold dread, sharp and sickening, spread through her chest. It wasn't the money that shocked her. It was the lie. Every shared complaint about their tight budget. Every conversation about saving up for a modest vacation. Every time he'd said, "We can't afford that right now, honey." It all replayed in her mind, now tainted with the bitter taste of deceit. Her first instinct was a wave of raw, unfiltered anger. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the portfolio across the room. How could he? How could he build their entire life, their entire love story, on such a monumental falsehood? Did he think she was a fool? Or worse, did he think she was a gold digger, a shallow creature who would change the second she knew the truth? The insult was staggering. He didn't trust her. After 5 years of marriage, of sharing a bed, a home, and a life, the man she loved didn't trust her. The tears came, then hot and silent. She cried for the life she thought she had. She cried for the man she thought she knew. She sat there for hours as the rain beat a mournful rhythm on the roof, the portfolio lying open on the desk like an open wound. The shock gave way to a profound sense of betrayal that settled deep in her bones. As dusk fell, her grief began to crystallize into something else, something harder. She thought about confronting him the moment he walked through the door, throwing the papers in his face and demanding an explanation. But what would that achieve? He would apologize, explain his reasons that would undoubtedly be rooted in a twisted paternalistic desire to protect her. He would beg for forgiveness. And then what? Could she ever look at him the same way? Could she ever unknow this? Every loving gesture, every shared smile would forever be filtered through the lens of this deception. No. A confrontation felt too simple, too clean. The lie wasn't simple. It was a complex, tangled web that had defined every moment of their marriage. Undoing it required more than just shouting and tears. An idea, cold and clear, began to form in her mind. He had underestimated her. He had judged her character without ever giving her a chance to prove him wrong. He had placed her in a gilded cage she hadn't even known existed. Fine. If he wanted to live in a world of secrets, she would join him. But she would play the game by her own rules. She wouldn't just uncover his truth, she would build her own. She carefully placed the portfolio back where she found it, wiping her tear-stained face. When Jacob came home, she would be waiting with the same loving smile and the same gentle kiss. But behind her eyes, a quiet revolution had begun. The Westfield Public Library. Once a place of quiet refuge for Jessica, transformed into her secret university. The woman who had once found joy in classic literature now devoured texts on corporate finance, investment strategies, and market analysis. The Dewey Decimal System became her treasure map, leading her to knowledge that felt both foreign and exhilarating. She used the library's computers to dive into the world Jacob had hidden from her, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a newfound purpose. She started small, creating an anonymous online profile to track the stock market. She followed the companies listed in his portfolio, the ones he secretly owned or controlled. She learned their histories, their market positions, their leadership teams. She read shareholder reports and financial news until her eyes burned. Miller Industries was the ghost in the machine, a holding company with its fingers in dozens of tech ventures. It was notoriously private, and its CEO, her husband, was a phantom. A name whispered in elite financial circles, but with no public photos or interviews. He was a ghost, and she was married to him. The more she learned, the more the hurt of his betrayal began to morph into a strange, empowering anger. He had thought her incapable of understanding this world. He had relegated her to a life of simplicity, assuming her mind was as simple as the life he'd designed for her. The condescension of it all fueled a fire within her. She decided she needed more than just theoretical knowledge. Using a small inheritance left to her by her grandmother, a modest sum of $20,000, she and Jacob had agreed to save for a rainy day. She opened her own secret brokerage account. Her first trades were small, cautious. She invested in sectors she understood, guided by her research. Some investments paid off, Others didn't. Each loss was a lesson, each gain a small victory that emboldened her. She discovered she had a knack for it, an intuitive understanding of market trends, and a patience that the volatile world of finance often rewarded. Her secret life required meticulous planning. She used a burner phone and a private laptop she kept hidden in a loose floorboard under her closet. Her library hours became longer, a fact she explained to Jacob as taking on extra shifts to help with their finances, an irony so bitter it was almost comical. While he was in Chicago or Denver, closing 9-figure deals, she was in the library's quiet study room, executing a trade worth a few $1,000s that felt just as monumental. One day, while researching non-profit tax law for a particularly dense financial text, she stumbled upon the concept of social entrepreneurship businesses designed to solve social problems. An idea sparked. She had always been passionate about child literacy and education. What if she could combine her newfound financial acumen with her old passion? She began drafting a business plan. The idea was simple but powerful, a non-profit foundation that would provide STEM and financial literacy education to underprivileged children in their community. It would be funded not by begging for donations, but by its own savvy investment wing, using a portion of its endowment to generate returns that would make the foundation self-sustaining. She would call it the Next Gen Forward Foundation. Putting this plan into action was the most terrifying step yet. It meant moving from the shadows of the internet into the real world. Using her maiden name, Jessica Brent, she registered the foundation. She rented a small, cheap office space in a neighboring town 20 miles from Westfield. She was no longer just Jessica Miller, the librarian. She was Jessica Brent, the founder and executive director of a burgeoning non-profit. She started by running small after-school workshops herself, using her librarian skills to create engaging curriculums. The work was exhausting, but deeply fulfilling. For the first time in years, she felt like she was building something that was truly hers. At home, she played her part flawlessly. She listened to Jacob's fabricated stories of office drudgery, nodding with the perfect blend of sympathy and wifely support. One evening he came home looking particularly weary. He slumped onto the couch, and she brought him a cup of tea. "Tough day?" she asked softly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You have no idea, Jess. Henderson is running us into the ground. Budgets, deadlines. It's just endless." She sat beside him, patting his arm. Inside her mind was racing. She had read in the Wall Street Journal that afternoon that a subsidiary of Miller Industries had just faced a major setback in a European expansion, a deal worth $50 million. His exhaustion was real, but its source was a universe away from what he claimed. "Well, you're home now," she said, her voice even. "Let's just forget about it. Let me worry about our budget. You just rest." He smiled, a tired but grateful expression on his face. "What would I do without you, Jess?" She smiled back, a perfect mask of loving contentment. "You have no idea," she thought. "You truly have no idea." 2 years passed. On the surface, life on Maple Street remained unchanged. The lie held a fragile dome over their shared existence. But beneath it, 2 worlds were hurtling towards an inevitable collision. Jacob's world was becoming increasingly unstable. A new player had emerged in the tech industry, a ruthless corporate raider named Victor Cromwell. Cromwell was everything Jacob wasn't: public, flamboyant, and brutally aggressive. His firm, Cromwell Capital, was known for hostile takeovers, buying up innovative companies, stripping them for parts, and selling off the remains for a quick, massive profit. and he had set his sights on Miller Industries. The assault began subtly. Cromwell started by acquiring smaller tech firms that were key suppliers to Miller Industries, disrupting their supply chain. Then he began buying up their publicly traded debt. Jacob, operating from his fortress of secrecy, found himself on the defensive. The pressure was immense. He worked longer hours, his business trips becoming more frequent and frantic. The strain began to show. He grew distant, his eyes clouded with a worry he couldn't share. He would come home late, the ghost of a multi-billion-dollar battle clinging to him, and try to slip back into the persona of the weary data analyst. One night, Jessica found him staring blankly at the television, his dinner untouched. "Everything okay, Jake?" she asked, her voice gentle. He flinched, startled out of his thoughts. "Yeah, fine. Just a lot of pressure at work. Henderson is panicking about the quarterly reports." Jessica knew from her research that Cromwell had just launched a direct public bid to buy a significant block of shares from a minority stakeholder in Miller Industries. The quarterly reports were a full-scale corporate war. The urge to call him out to say "I know you're lying" was a physical ache in her chest. But she held back. It wasn't time. Her own plans were not yet mature. Her world, in stark contrast to his, was thriving. The Next Gen Forward Foundation was no longer a small one-woman operation. It had grown into a respected institution. Jessica, or rather Jessica Brent, as she was known in the professional world, had proven to be a remarkably astute leader. Her unique model of a self-sustaining endowment, managed by her own surprisingly sharp investment strategies, was a roaring success. The Foundation's educational programs had expanded across the state, earning her accolades and the attention of major philanthropists. She had a real office now with a small but dedicated staff. She commanded respect in boardrooms, her soft-spoken demeanor belying a sharp, analytical mind. She had become a master of compartmentalization. At 5 p.m., she would leave the world of Jessica Brent behind. She'd change out of her tailored business suit in a gym locker room, putting on the simple jeans and sweater of Jessica Miller before driving home to Westfield. The irony was not lost on her. Jacob had lied to keep his world from touching hers, and now she was doing the exact same thing. But there was a crucial difference. His lie was built on a fear of her weakness. Hers was built on a demonstration of her strength. The crisis with Victor Cromwell escalated. Cromwell, frustrated by Jacob's private defenses, decided to go public. He leaked a story to a major financial newspaper, hinting that Miller Industries' mysterious, reclusive CEO was in over his head, that the company was vulnerable. The article didn't name Jacob, but for those in the know, the message was clear. That evening, Jacob was a wreck. He paced the small living room, his face pale. Jessica watched him, her heart a confusing mix of pity and resolve. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, and the walls were closing in. "Jake, talk to me," she finally said, stopping him by placing a hand on his arm. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, hunted expression. For a fleeting second, she thought he was going to confess. The words seemed to be right on his lips. He opened his mouth, then closed it, shaking his head. "It's nothing, Jess. It's just work. I'll handle it," he mumbled, pulling away. "I think I'll just go for a drive." He grabbed his keys and left the front door clicking shut behind him, leaving Jessica alone in the deafening silence of their perfect, fabricated home. She knew he wasn't just going for a drive. He was going to his real office, to his real life, to fight a war he refused to admit he was waging. The storm was no longer approaching. It was here. And she knew with chilling certainty that it would sweep away everything in its path. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in deception. A silent, tense ballet performed by two people living under the same roof, but in entirely different realities. Jacob Miller, the public data analyst, became a ghost in his own home. He was perpetually exhausted, his phone buzzing at all hours with calls he would take in hushed, urgent tones in the garage. He claimed Mr. Henderson was forcing the team into mandatory overtime to deal with a systems migration. The lies were becoming flimsy transparent, but Jessica never questioned them. Meanwhile, Jacob Miller, the clandestine CEO, was fighting the battle of his life. Victor Cromwell was relentless, a shark that had tasted blood. He was poaching key executives, launching smear campaigns in the press, and using his vast resources to drive down the value of Jacob's assets, making a hostile takeover cheaper. Jacob was pouring his personal fortune into propping up the company, a desperate move that was bleeding him dry at an alarming rate. He was isolated, trapped by his own secrecy. He couldn't rally his allies without exposing himself, and he couldn't ask for help from the one person he shared his life with. In a parallel universe just 20 miles away, Jessica Brent, the CEO of Next Gen Forward, was having a very different experience. Her foundation had become a powerhouse. Its success had attracted the attention of some of the very philanthropists and venture capitalists who had once worked with Miller Industries. They were impressed by her innovative model and her sharp financial mind. They saw her as a rising star. One of these investors was a man named Arthur Vance, an old guard financier who had been an early mentor to Jacob's grandfather. He had been pushed out of Miller Industries' board years ago over a disagreement with Jacob about the company's reclusive strategy. Vance saw in Jessica the same fire and vision he had seen in the first Miller. He requested a meeting. They met in a discreet restaurant in the city. "Ms. Brent," Arthur began, his eyes sharp and assessing over his glasses, "I've been following your work with Next Gen. It's revolutionary. Your endowment's performance in particular is extraordinary. You have a rare talent." "Thank you, Mr. Vance," Jessica replied calmly, though her heart was pounding. She knew exactly who he was. "I'll be direct," he said. "I see what Cromwell is doing to Miller Industries. It's a tragedy. The company has lost its way, hiding in the shadows. It needs new leadership, a new direction. It needs someone like you." Jessica held his gaze. "That's a very flattering thought, Mr. Vance, but I'm in the non-profit sector. Miller Industries is a different league." "Is it?" he countered. "You run a multi-million-dollar endowment with the skill of a Wall Street veteran. You build things. Cromwell only destroys." Many of the company's minority shareholders are getting nervous. They're looking for an alternative to Cromwell, a white knight. They're looking for a leader they can trust. An audacious, terrifying plan began to form in Jessica's mind. It was a gamble of epic proportions, a move so bold it could either save everything or destroy it all. "What if," she said slowly, choosing her words with surgical precision, "there was a way to shield the company, not just from Cromwell, but from its own self-imposed secrecy? A merger, perhaps. A partnership that would infuse it with a new, transparent and socially responsible purpose." Arthur Vance leaned forward, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I'm listening." Over the next few weeks, Jessica, with Arthur's covert guidance, began to move her pieces into place. Using the Foundation's powerful endowment, and backed by a consortium of investors, Arthur had gathered. Next Gen Forward began quietly buying up the available stock of Miller Industries. They also acquired the debt Cromwell had been accumulating. It was a high-risk, high-wire act. They were fighting a war on two fronts, a public battle against Cromwell's takeover and a secret one against Jacob's ignorance. At home, the strain on Jacob was reaching a breaking point. One evening he came home, his face ashen. He dropped his briefcase by the door and just stood there, looking utterly defeated. "Cromwell's made a final offer," he said, his voice hollow. He had forgotten to filter his words through his data analyst persona. He was just a man at the end of his rope. Jessica looked up from the book she was pretending to read. "Henderson's company?" she asked, keeping her tone soft and concerned. He just nodded, not even registering her question. "He's going to get it. He'll tear it apart. Everything my grandfather built. Gone." He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with despair. "Jess, I haven't been honest with you." Jessica closed her book, her heart starting to beat faster. This was it. The moment the two worlds would finally collide. "I know," she said softly. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with confusion. "You... what?" "I know you're not a data analyst, Jake," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I know about Miller Industries. I know about Victor Cromwell. And I know you're about to lose it all." The color drained from his face. He looked at her as if he were seeing a stranger, the carefully constructed walls of his life crumbling around him in real time. The silence in the small living room on Maple Street was absolute, broken only by the frantic ticking of the mantel clock and the sound of Jacob's own ragged breathing. He stared at Jessica, his mind struggling to catch up with the words she had just spoken. "I know." Two simple words that had detonated his entire reality. "How?" He finally whispered, his voice hoarse. "How long have you known?" "A long time," Jessica said, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer any more, letting the weight of his own deception settle upon him. For Jacob it was like falling through ice. The carefully maintained barrier between his two lives had been shattered. The woman he had spent years protecting with his lies was looking at him with a calm, unnerving clarity, revealing that she had seen through his charade all along. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over him, shame, fear, and a bewildering sense of exposure. "Jess, I can explain," he stammered, taking a step towards her. "I wanted to tell you, so many times. I did it to protect you, to protect us. My father, what happened with my mother. I saw what money can do to people. I didn't want it to poison us. I wanted you to love me, for me, not for..." He gestured vaguely, at a loss for words to describe the fortune that had been his secret burden. "For your money," she finished for him, her voice cool and even. "You thought my love was so conditional, so shallow, that the knowledge of your wealth would instantly turn me into a different person. No, not you. I was afraid." He admitted, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The mighty CEO was gone, replaced by a vulnerable, frightened man. I was terrified of losing the only real thing in my life. And now, because of my stupidity, because I tried to handle this all myself, I'm going to lose everything anyway. Cromwell has me cornered. The board is going to accept his offer tomorrow morning. It's over." He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The full weight of his failure, both as a CEO and as a husband, pressed down on him. He had not only failed to protect his grandfather's legacy, but he had also insulted the integrity of the woman he loved. He had lost on all fronts. He had built a prison of lies and was now its only inmate. He expected shouting. He expected tears of rage. He expected her to pack a bag and walk out the door, and frankly, he wouldn't have blamed her. He had earned her contempt. But Jessica did none of those things. She sat down in the armchair opposite him, her posture poised and deliberate. The librarian, the simple homemaker, had vanished. In her place was a woman of formidable composure. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice cutting through his despair. "It's over. Your way of doing things, hiding in the shadows, underestimating the people around you, that's over." Jacob looked up, confused. This wasn't the reaction he had braced himself for. There was no anger in her voice, only a steely resolve he had never heard before. "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, Jessica rose and walked to the hallway closet. She didn't retrieve a suitcase. She came back with a sleek leather briefcase he had never seen before. She placed it on the coffee table between them and clicked it open. Inside were not books or knitting needles, but stacks of professionally bound documents. She slid one folder across the table towards him. It was thick with a simple, elegant logo on the front. He didn't recognize a stylized tree with roots and branches intertwined in a circle. Below it were the words, "Next Gen Forward Foundation." "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper, as he opened the folder. The first page was a letter of intent. His eyes scanned the text, but the words refused to make sense. It was a formal offer addressed to the board of directors of Miller Industries. It was a counteroffer to the one made by Cromwell Capital. It proposed a strategic merger that would not only inject massive capital into the company, but also absorb its key assets into a new, forward-thinking corporate structure. The offer was robust, intelligent, and financially sound. It was better than Cromwell's. It was a white knight offer, designed to save the company, not dismantle it. He stared at the signature line, at the bottom of the letter, his blood turning to ice. The offer was signed by Ms. Jessica Brent, founder and executive director of Next Gen Forward. Jacob's world tilted on its axis. He read the signature again, then looked from the document to his wife's face. The quiet, unassuming woman he had married, the part-time librarian he thought he was shielding from the complexities of his life, was the architect of this sophisticated multi-million-dollar corporate maneuver. The name Jessica Brent, her maiden name, stared up at him, a symbol of a whole identity she had built without his knowledge. Next Gen Forward. He breathed the words, feeling alien in his mouth. Jessica Brent. "What is this?" "It's my foundation," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "I started it 2.5 years ago. We focus on providing STEM and financial literacy programs to children in underserved communities. And our endowment, which I manage, has performed rather well." That was the understatement of the century. He flipped through the folder, his hands shaking. He saw detailed financial statements, asset allocations, and performance reports that would make any Wall Street fund manager weep with envy. Her foundation wasn't just successful. It was a financial powerhouse with a net worth that was staggering. He saw the trail of stock purchases, the strategic acquisition of his company's debt from other firms, the very debt Cromwell had been trying to consolidate. She hadn't just built a non-profit. She had secretly forged a shield around his entire empire right under his nose. She had been fighting Cromwell in the open market, while he had been fighting him from the shadows, and he'd had no idea they were even on the same battlefield. How Semu was all he could manage. The money, the expertise. Where did all of this come from? The seed money was my grandmother's inheritance, she explained calmly. The $20,000 we were saving for a rainy day. As for the expertise, A faint, wry smile touched her lips. "I'm a librarian, Jacob. I know how to do research. It turns out your portfolio was a very educational document." The memory of the misplaced portfolio from years ago flashed in his mind. He had thought it was a close call, a crisis averted. He never imagined it was the single spark that had ignited this inferno of change. He had underestimated her at every turn. He had treated her like a fragile doll to be protected while she had been quietly becoming a queen on the chessboard. He didn't even know they were playing on. "You knew," he said, the full weight of it finally hitting him. "All this time. Every night you listened to my stupid made-up stories about Mr. Henderson. You knew." "I knew," she confirmed, "and every day I waited for you to trust me. I waited for you to see me as a partner, not a liability. You never did. So I decided to become a partner you couldn't ignore." The shocking reaction he had always feared, the tears, the greed, the anger paled in comparison to this reality. This was so much more profound, so much more devastating to his ego. She hadn't left him. She hadn't screamed at him. She had quietly and brilliantly outmaneuvered him. She had saved his company not out of wifely duty, but as a strategic business decision from a position of power. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The quiet strength he had always admired was not meekness. It was immense, controlled power. Her intelligence, which he'd appreciated in their discussions about books and world events, was a razor-sharp intellect, capable of navigating the most treacherous corporate waters. The love he had tried to preserve by building a wall of lies had been strong enough all along to handle the truth. It was his trust that had been too weak. "The board," he said numbly. "They won't just accept an offer from an unknown foundation." "They won't be," Jessica said, sliding another document from her briefcase. It was a list of proxies and letters of support. "I haven't been working alone. Arthur Vance and a consortium of minority shareholders who are tired of your reclusive leadership are backing our offer. They believe in our vision, a new Miller Industries one that is public, transparent, and has a social conscience at its core, led by Next Gen Forward." She paused, letting the final unspoken piece of the puzzle hang in the air. "Led by me." There it was, the final checkmate. She wasn't just saving his company. She was taking it. His shock gave way to a dawning, humbling sense of awe. He had spent his life afraid of a gold digger, only to discover he was married to a titan. He had hidden his kingdom from her, and in response, she had gone out and built her own. And now her kingdom was about to absorb his. He looked at the woman sitting across from him, this brilliant, formidable stranger who was his wife, and for the first time he understood the true magnitude of his foolishness. He didn't say a word. He just started to laugh. A hollow, broken, and utterly bewildered laugh. The sound of Jacob's laughter echoed in the small room, a strange, unhinged noise that was equal parts despair and disbelief. It wasn't a laugh of joy or humor, but the sound of a man whose entire worldview had been systematically dismantled in the space of 10 minutes. Jessica watched him, her expression unchanging, allowing him the space to process the seismic shock. When his laughter subsided, he looked up at her, his eyes raw with a humility she had never seen in him before. The arrogance of the secret billionaire, the paternalistic protector, it had all been stripped away. All that was left was the man exposed and vulnerable. "You did all this," he said, his voice quiet with awe as he gestured towards the documents on the table. "While I was playing a fool's game, you were building an empire." "I was building a life, Jacob," she corrected him gently. "My own life. I did it because you left me no choice. You showed me that the life we had wasn't entirely real, so I had to create something that was." This was the conversation they should have had years ago. All the secrets, fears, and resentments that had festered in the silence between them came pouring out. He told her everything about his father's painful history, the deep scars left by his mother's betrayal, and the profound fear that had driven him to build his fortress of lies. He confessed that his deception wasn't born from a lack of love for her, but from a brokenness within himself. Jessica listened without judgment, and then she shared her own story. She told him of the heart-wrenching pain she felt upon discovering his secret, the sting of his mistrust that felt sharper than any betrayal. She explained how that pain had morphed into a resolve to prove him wrong, to prove to herself that she was more than the simple, naive woman he perceived her to be. "I never wanted your money, Jacob," she said, her voice finally cracking with the emotion she had held back for so long. "I just wanted your trust. I wanted all of you, not just the edited version you thought I could handle." In that moment, standing amidst the wreckage of their old life, they began to lay the foundation for a new one. The next morning, Jacob didn't go to his secret office. Instead, he and Jessica drove into the city together in her car. They walked into the emergency board meeting for Miller Industries, not as husband and wife in the traditional sense, but as two CEOs preparing for a merger. The board was stunned. The reclusive phantom leader of their company appeared in the flesh, but he immediately ceded the floor to the woman beside him. Jessica, poised, articulate, and in complete command of her material, laid out her vision. She spoke not of hostile takeovers, but of a synergistic partnership. She presented a future where Miller Industries' technological prowess would be paired with Next-Gen Forward's mission for social good. A company that would not only dominate the market, but also make a tangible difference in the world. When Victor Cromwell and his team arrived expecting a swift victory, they walked into a unified front they could not break. Jessica's offer, backed by Jacob's full endorsement and the support of key shareholders, was overwhelmingly approved. Cromwell was defeated. His predatory ambitions thwarted not by a hidden billionaire, but by a part-time librarian he had never even heard of. Their life on Maple Street ended that week. They sold the house that had been the stage for their elaborate play and moved into a penthouse apartment overlooking the city. But the luxury felt different now. It wasn't a secret to be hidden, but a tool to be used, a resource for the new shared life they were building. Jacob took a different role in the new company, which they renamed the Miller-Brent Initiative. He stepped away from the CEO position, willingly becoming the head of research and development, pouring his energy into the innovation he truly loved. He was happier, freer than he had ever been. Jessica as CEO flourished. She was a natural leader, visionary, and empathetic, guiding the company to new heights of success and social impact. They were no longer living separate lives under one roof. They were true partners in the boardroom and at home. Their love story wasn't the simple, easy fairy tale Jacob had tried to write. It was a complex, messy, and ultimately far more beautiful story of two people who had to tear down a life of lies to finally find their truth. Their happily ever after wasn't built on a carefully protected illusion, but on the solid, unshakable foundation of trust, respect, and a partnership of equals. 5 years later, the grand ballroom of the Intercontinental Hotel glittered under the light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. It was the annual National Business Leadership Awards, the most prestigious event in the corporate calendar. At the podium stood Jessica Miller, Brent, the CEO of the Miller-Brent Initiative. a picture of grace and authority in a simple, elegant navy gown. The applause that had thundered through the room moments ago was just beginning to fade. In the front row, Jacob watched his wife, his heart full of a pride so immense it felt tangible. He was not here as a reclusive billionaire or a shadow CEO, but simply as Jacob Miller, the company's chief innovation officer and Jessica's husband. He caught her eye, and she gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile before turning back to the microphone. "Thank you," Jessica began, her voice clear and steady. "To receive the award for the most socially responsible company is a profound honor. But I must be clear, this award doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to every employee who believes in our dual mission, that progress without purpose is meaningless, and that profit without principle is a hollow victory." She spoke of their work of bringing cutting-edge technology to developing nations, of their foundation that now served over 100,000 children nationwide, and of their commitment to a transparent, ethical business model. "For a long time," she continued, her gaze sweeping over the audience of industry titans, "the business world has operated under the assumption that we must build walls to protect what we have. We've learned that the opposite is true. True strength, true legacy comes not from building walls, but from building bridges." Jacob knew she was speaking not just of business philosophy, but of their own story. The wall he had built around their marriage had almost destroyed them. The bridges she had built had saved them. "Finally," Jessica said, her eyes finding Jacob's once more, "I want to thank my partner in all things, my husband, Jacob. His brilliance is the engine of our innovation, but his trust is the foundation of our success. He taught me that it is never too late to tear down a life of secrets and build a new one based on truth." The applause that followed was even louder than the first. Later that night, they stood on the balcony of their penthouse, the city lights spread before them like a blanket of fallen stars. The heavy glass award sat on the mantelpiece inside, gleaming in the soft light. Jacob came up behind Jessica, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You were incredible tonight," he said softly. "We were," she corrected him, leaning back into his embrace. "Everything we do together." He smiled, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I was just thinking about Victor Cromwell," he said. "I read last week that his firm officially dissolved. Chapter 7 bankruptcy. All those companies he tore apart, all that destruction. It all just amounted to nothing." "It's because he was building on a foundation of greed," Jessica murmured, looking out at the skyline. "It's like building on sand. It can never last." Jacob turned her around to face him, his hands gentle on her arms. "And what are we building on?" She looked into his eyes, and he saw the same warmth and love that had captivated him in a coffee shop a decade ago. But now it was deeper, richer, forged in the fires of their shared past. "We're building on something real, Jake," she said. "Something that will outlast both of us." Her gaze drifted to a silver frame on the table beside them. It was a recent photo from the first graduating class of a next-gen forward scholarship program. In it, 20 bright-eyed, smiling teenagers once deemed underprivileged stood ready to attend top universities. They were the architects, doctors, and engineers of the future. That was their legacy. Not the 9-figure number in a bank account, not the corporate towers or the fancy awards, but the bridges they had built to the next generation. Jacob pulled her close, and as they stood together, partners in every sense of the word, they were no longer defined by the secrets of the past, but by the shared, transparent promise of the future they were creating together. That's the incredible story of Jacob and Jessica Miller, a marriage built on a secret fortune and a lie meant to protect it. Jacob thought he was shielding his wife from the corrupting influence of wealth, but in the end, he was only shielding himself from the truth of her incredible strength. Her reaction wasn't the anger he feared, but a brilliant display of power and intelligence that not only saved his company, but transformed their lives forever. It's a powerful reminder that the greatest asset in any relationship isn't money or security, but unconditional trust. What do you think you would have done in Jessica's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story of hidden strength, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you speechless. Thank you for listening.
The chandeliers of the Metropolitan Museum of Art dripped with crystal light, but for Rosalind Vance they felt like the cold, judging eyes of a world she didn't belong to. She was a ghost at the feast, a simple analyst in a sea of titans. And one of those titans, the heir apparent to a global empire, had just looked through her, as if she were glass. With a dismissive sneer, he uttered the 5 words that would echo in the grand hall and change her life forever: "I don't talk to nobodies." He had no idea he was speaking to the one woman who held the keys to his kingdom, the silent architect of his downfall, and the future CEO of his company. This is the story of how a single moment of arrogance shattered an empire and forged a new queen. The annual Sterling Dynamics Foundation Gala was the undisputed pinnacle of New York's philanthropic calendar. It was a place where titans of industry negotiated billion-dollar handshakes over canapes, where legacy fortunes mingled with new money tech disruptors, and where the line between charity and corporate maneuvering was elegantly blurred. The theme this year was Innovations of Tomorrow, a nod to the company's founder and retiring chairman Alistair Sterling, a man whose genius in advanced materials had reshaped the 21st century. Rosalind Vance clutched the stem of her water glass, the condensation a cool anchor in her clammy palm. Her dress, a tasteful but simple midnight blue gown rented for the occasion, felt like a costume. She was a data analyst, a creature of spreadsheets and quiet laboratories, not of curated crowds and flash photography. She was only here because Alistair himself had sent the invitation, a single hand-signed card with a simple note: "Be there, Rosalind. It's important." She had known Alistair her whole life. He had been her father's partner, the brilliant, eccentric visionary to her father's methodical engineering genius. Together, David Vance and Alistair Sterling had built Sterling Dynamics from a garage workshop into a global behemoth. After her father's sudden death a decade ago, Alistair had become a quiet, distant guardian, funding her education and giving her a starting position in the company he'd built with the man she missed every day. But in the sprawling corporate hierarchy, she was a minnow. She worked in the R&D analysis division, buried deep in the corporate structure, her reports on material stress and component durability read by mid-level managers who likely never even registered her name. A wave of laughter erupted from a nearby group, drawing her attention. At its center was Preston Caldwell III, the company's chief operating officer, and the man everyone at the gala, from the waiters to the Wall Street journalists, knew was Alistair's hand-picked successor. Preston was impossibly handsome, with a jawline that seemed carved from granite and a Wharton MBA that he wore with more pride than his custom tuxedo. He moved through the crowd, not like a guest, but like a monarch surveying his court. His eyes, the color of cold steel, swept the room and briefly landed on Rosalind. There was no recognition, only a flicker of dismissive appraisal. She was not a board member, not an investor, not a society heiress. She was in his world, decorative scenery that had somehow wandered too close to the main stage. Gathering a breath, Rosalind decided to retreat to the quieter periphery of the hall when a voice cut through the air. "Preston, darling." It was Beatrice Croft, a notoriously sharp-tongued columnist for the Financial Chronicle, a woman whose pen could make or break reputations. The man of the hour. "Everyone's saying tonight's the night Alistair finally passes you the torch." Preston gave a practiced, charming smile. "Beatrice, you know Alistair loves his theatrics. We're all just here to celebrate the Foundation's work." But he lowered his voice conspiratorially, yet loud enough for those nearby to hear. "One can always hope the future arrives on schedule." His gaze drifted again, and this time it snagged on Rosalind, who had been inadvertently trapped near their circle. Beatrice followed his line of sight. "Who's that?" she asked, her tone laced with the casual cruelty of the elite. "I don't recognize her." Preston didn't even bother to look at Rosalind directly. He took a sip of his champagne, a small, arrogant smirk playing on his lips. He addressed his comment to Beatrice, but it was aimed like a dart at Rosalind. "Oh, her," he said the word her, dripping with condescension. "That's nobody. Probably a +1 from some junior department. The company has to fill the room after all." The words struck Rosalind with a physical force. Nobody. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was an erasure. In that single moment, Preston Caldwell III had summed up her entire existence within the company. She loved the company her father had given his life to build. He had stripped her of her history, her work, her very identity, and cast her aside as irrelevant background noise. The circle of people around him chuckled politely, the sound a grating symphony of their shared privilege. A hot flush of shame and anger crept up her neck. Her first instinct was to flee, to disappear into the New York night and forget this entire humiliating ordeal. But then she caught a glimpse of a figure standing by the far balcony, partially obscured by a marble column. It was Alistair Sterling. He wasn't looking at Preston. His old, piercing eyes were fixed directly on her. There was no pity in his gaze, but something else, an intensity, a quiet expectation. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "Remember why you are here." And she did. She remembered the late-night phone calls, the encrypted files she'd been sending him for the past 6 months, the secret project he had entrusted to her and her alone. She remembered the promise she'd made to him and to the memory of her father. Her spine straightened. The shame receded, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. Preston Caldwell III had made a grave error. He thought he was dismissing a nobody. He had no idea he had just insulted the person Alistair Sterling had chosen to be his executioner. Rosalind held Alistair's gaze for a second longer, then deliberately turned her back on Preston and his sycophants, melting back into the crowd. The game, she realized, had just begun. And while Preston was playing for the crown, she was playing to protect the soul of the kingdom. 2 years before the gala, Rosalind's life was a predictable rhythm of data sets and solitude. Her small apartment in Queens was a world away from the gleaming Sterling Tower in Manhattan where she worked. The space was neat, almost sparse. Its walls lined not with art but with bookshelves groaning under the weight of texts on materials science, metallurgical engineering, and corporate ethics. Her most prized possession was a framed photograph on her desk, a younger, beaming Alistair Sterling with his arm around her father, David Vance. They were standing in front of the shell of their first manufacturing plant, 2 young men on the verge of changing the world, their faces alight with an unbreakable bond of ambition and friendship. David Vance was the quiet genius of the pair. He was the one who could spend 100 hours in a lab perfecting a single polymer chain, the one who believed that the integrity of their products was a direct reflection of their own integrity. "We're not just building parts for jets, Rosie," he used to tell her, ruffling her hair as she sat on a stool in his home workshop. "We're building trust. Every bolt, every composite sheet has someone's life depending on it. Never compromise on the foundation." When he died in a car accident, the foundation of Rosalind's world had crumbled. Alistair had paid for everything: the funeral, her college education at MIT, a generous trust she rarely touched. He had honored his partner's memory. But as Sterling Dynamics grew into a global juggernaut, Rosalind watched from a distance as its culture began to shift. The focus moved from foundational excellence to quarterly earnings reports. David Vance's methodical safety-first principles were slowly being eroded by a new generation of executives, led by the charismatic and ruthless Preston Caldwell III. Preston represented everything her father had cautioned against. He was a master of the spectacular announcement, the overpromised projection, and the strategically leaked rumor. He championed projects that looked good on a press release but were, as Rosalind discovered in her low-level analyses, often built on rushed timelines and compromised material specifications. Her quiet life was interrupted by a phone call one Tuesday evening. The caller ID was blocked. Rosalind Vance. The voice was old familiar and carried an unmistakable weight. Mr. Sterling. She asked, her heart lurching. He hadn't called her directly in years. Alistair. Please, child, he said, his voice softer than she remembered. I apologize for the cloak and dagger nature of this call. I find my own office has more ears than I'd like these days. Are you somewhere private? She confirmed she was. What followed was a conversation that recharted the course of her life. Alistair confessed his growing unease. He was being pushed towards retirement by his board, a board heavily influenced by Preston and his faction. They saw Alistair's focus on long-term stability and research as outdated. They wanted aggressive expansion mergers and a leaner, meaner company. They talk about my legacy, Alistair said, a weary bitterness in his voice. But they want to build it on a foundation of sand. Your father and I, we built this company to last 1,000 years, Rosalind. To be a monument to quality. Preston wants to turn it into a shell game for Wall Street. He told her he needed someone on the inside, someone with the technical expertise to see what he could no longer see from his boardroom perch, and someone he could trust implicitly, someone with David Vance's blood in their veins. I'm just an analyst, Alistair, she had stammered. You're a Vance, he'd countered. That's more than enough. I'm not asking you to stage a coup. I'm asking you to look. I'm giving you top-level security clearance funneled through a ghost protocol. No one will know it's you. I want you to start with Project Chimera. Preston is pushing it as his magnum opus, the future of the company. I want to know if it's a masterpiece or a forgery. For the next 6 months, Rosalind lived a double life. By day, she was the quiet analyst in Cubicle 4B, running routine stress tests on mundane components. By night, she was Alistair's secret weapon, diving deep into the encrypted servers of Sterling Dynamics. Using the ghost access he'd provided, she pulled the raw, unfiltered data from Project Chimera, Preston's flagship initiative, to create a revolutionary new alloy for deep space applications. The official reports that reached the board were glowing. They spoke of unprecedented tensile strength and thermal resistance. But Rosalind, with her father's ingrained skepticism, saw what the executives missed or chose to ignore. She saw microfractures in the simulation models. She saw that the testing data from the primary subcontractor, a company called Omnitech Solutions, was suspiciously perfect, lacking the statistical noise inherent in all real-world material testing. She dug deeper, cross-referencing Omnitech's corporate filings. She discovered it was a shell corporation founded only 2 years prior, with its ownership buried in a labyrinth of holding companies that eventually led back to a private equity fund managed by Preston Caldwell's brother-in-law. The truth was a cold, sickening stone in her stomach. Project Chimera was a fraud. Preston was either knowingly cooking the books, or he was so blinded by his own ambition that he was ignoring 100 red flags. The alloy was unstable. If it were ever used in a real-world application like the fuselage of a next-generation spacecraft, as intended, the results would be catastrophic. It wasn't just a financial disaster waiting to happen. It was a potential tragedy. She compiled her findings into a meticulously detailed 300-page report codenamed Legacy. It was filled not with accusations but with cold, hard data, the language her father had taught her to speak. The final page was a simulation model she had built from scratch, predicting a 97.3% probability of catastrophic structural failure under the specified operational stresses. She sent the encrypted file to Alistair a week before the gala. His response came 2 hours later, a single line of text. The truth has a way of finding the light. Be at the Met. It's time. Standing in that grand hall, the sting of Preston's insult fresh in her mind, Rosalind finally understood. The gala wasn't just a party. It was a stage. And Alistair Sterling, the old maestro, was about to conduct his final, most dramatic symphony. Her report was the score, and she, the nobody, was his star soloist. Preston Caldwell III surveyed the grand ballroom of the Met from his position at the room's epicenter. He saw not a collection of people, but a network of assets and liabilities. To his left was Senator Thompson, a key vote on the Senate Armed Services Committee, an asset to be cultivated. Near the bar was Gerald Finney, the CEO of their biggest rival, a liability to be monitored. Every smile was a transaction, every handshake a subtle negotiation. This was his element. The world of power was a chessboard, and he was in his own estimation a grandmaster. His dismissal of the mousy girl in the blue dress had already been forgotten, a momentary swatting away of a gnat. His focus was on the bigger prize. For 5 years he had been meticulously orchestrating his ascension. He had joined Sterling Dynamics as a VP of Business Development and had clawed his way to COO with a combination of dazzling presentations, ruthless cost-cutting, and the strategic removal of anyone who clung to what he called the old ways. The old ways was his private term for the philosophy of David Vance and the lingering sentimentality of Alistair Sterling. He found it quaint, almost pathetic. This wasn't a family workshop anymore. It was a publicly traded multinational corporation with a duty to its shareholders, a duty to maximize profit. Vance's obsession with decade-long R&D cycles and 100-year durability was a bottleneck. The market rewarded speed, disruption, and bold narratives. Project Chimera was his boldest narrative yet. It was the key that would unlock the CEO's office. He had conceived of it himself, bypassing the company's traditional sluggish R&D pipeline. Instead of relying on Sterling's in-house teams, who were always bogged down by safety protocols and further testing, he had outsourced the core material development to a hungry, agile third-party firm, OmniTech Solutions. They had delivered miraculous results in record time. Of course, he knew the data was a little optimistic. He wasn't an engineer, but he wasn't a fool. He knew that the perfect clean results from OmniTech were likely smoothed over the outliers conveniently discarded. But that was how the game was played. You secured the multi-billion-dollar government contract first, with the dazzling prototype and the perfect data. You dealt with the messy reality of production and engineering challenges later. By the time any potential issues surfaced, the stock price would have already soared. His position as CEO would be cemented, and he could blame any subsequent problems on the implementation team. It was standard operating procedure in the modern corporate world. Preston, a magnificent evening. The voice belonged to Lawrence Hayes, the most influential member of the Sterling Dynamics board of directors. Hayes was a pragmatist, a man who cared only for the bottom line. Lawrence Preston said, clasping his shoulder warmly, "I'm glad you could make it." A toast to Alistair on his final bow. A toast to the future, more like, Hayes said, his eyes twinkling. The board is in agreement. Your presentation on Chimera last week sealed the deal. Alistair is a legend, but the company needs a new kind of energy. Your energy. Preston felt a surge of triumph. He had spent years winning over Hayes and the other board members, convincing them that Alistair's cautious, long-view approach was holding the company back. He had painted a picture of a future Sterling Dynamics under his leadership, lean, agile, and dominant, acquiring competitors and slashing the legacy departments that didn't directly contribute to the quarterly profit margin. First on his list was the deep-level R&D division, David Vance's old sanctuary, a place he saw as a money pit of dreamers and academics. "I appreciate the board's confidence," Lawrence Preston said smoothly. "Alistair has built a remarkable vessel. I just intend to equip it with faster sails." His gaze fell upon Alistair, who was now making his way toward the stage. The old man looked frail tonight, a relic from a bygone era. Preston felt a fleeting, dismissive sort of pity for him. Alistair didn't understand that the world had changed. Loyalty and legacy were sentimental notions. The only language that mattered was power, and the dialect was money. A young woman, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal, approached him with a microphone. "Mr. Caldwell, any comment on the rumors that tonight's speech will include the announcement of your promotion to CEO?" Preston feigned humility, a mask he wore with expert ease. "Tonight is about celebrating Alistair Sterling's incredible career and the work of the foundation. Any decisions about the company's future leadership are for the board and Mr. Sterling to announce in their own time." He gave her a wink. "But I will say that I am incredibly excited about the direction Sterling Dynamics is headed." He truly was. His first 100 days were already planned. A strategic restructuring, layoffs, the acquisition of 2 smaller tech firms to bolster their patent portfolio, and the grand unveiling of the first major contract for Project Chimera, a partnership with NASA and the Department of Defense. It would be his coronation. He allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. He had outmaneuvered everyone. He had reshaped the narrative of the company in his own image. The old guard was fading, and his era was about to begin. He glanced around the room, a king awaiting his crown. He didn't notice the quiet data analyst in the blue dress standing near the back, a living ghost of the very foundation he was so eager to demolish. He had dismissed her as a nobody, utterly oblivious to the fact that in her pocket was a simple USB drive containing the truth, a truth that could unravel his entire meticulously crafted gambit. While Preston Caldwell was holding court, Rosalind found a small, unoccupied terrace overlooking the darkened expanse of Central Park. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the stifling heat and pressure of the ballroom. She pulled a slim, encrypted USB drive from her small clutch purse. It felt impossibly heavy, a dense concentration of truth in a city built on illusion. The creation of the Legacy Report had been the most intense and isolating period of her life. It had started with the data from Project Chimera. The numbers were too clean. In materials science, perfection is a sign of fraud, not success. Real-world testing produces bell curves, outliers, and statistical noise. Omnitech's data was a perfect flatline of optimal performance. It was like a photograph with no shadows, unnervingly flawless. Her first step was to build a parallel simulation. Using Sterling Dynamics' own proprietary modeling software, a system her father had helped design, she input Omnitech's claimed alloy composition and subjected it to a barrage of virtual stress tests. The official simulations, the ones Preston had presented to the board, were limited in scope, testing the material only under ideal conditions. Rosalind pushed the parameters. She simulated extreme thermal cycling from the deep cold of space to the fiery heat of atmospheric re-entry. She modeled the effects of prolonged vibrational harmonics, the kind of subtle, constant shaking a spacecraft endures for years. The results began to confirm her suspicions. Her models, grounded in the unforgiving laws of physics that her father had taught her were immutable, showed a cascade of failures. Under prolonged vibrational stress, microscopic cracks began to form along the alloy's crystalline lattice. In the thermal cycling test, the material exhibited a terrifying brittleness, its tensile strength dropping by 70% after only a few hundred cycles. It wasn't just unstable. It was a time bomb. But data, however damning, wasn't enough. She knew Preston would dismiss it as a battle of competing models. He would hire a team of consultants to muddy the waters and call her analysis flawed. She needed something irrefutable. She needed to expose the source of the fraud, Omnitech. Posing as a freelance compliance auditor and using a secure VPN that routed her connection through 3 different continents, she began to investigate. She spent weeks buried in financial records, shipping manifests, and corporate registries. The labyrinth of shell companies was designed to be impenetrable, but they had made one small mistake. A single wire transfer for the lease of a testing facility in Delaware had been miscoded, leaving a digital breadcrumb. Rosalind followed it. She discovered the Delaware facility was a front. Cross-referencing its utility bills, she found its electricity consumption was barely enough to power a small office. not the massive power-hungry furnaces and spectrometers required for metallurgical testing. The real work she suspected wasn't happening at all. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place at 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning, fueled by coffee and a dogged refusal to quit. She uncovered a series of encrypted emails between Omnitech's CEO Preston's brother-in-law and a disgruntled former lab technician from one of Sterling's own research divisions. The technician had been fired by Preston a year earlier as part of a cost-saving measure. In the emails, he detailed how he had sold Sterling's baseline research data to Omnitech, the very data from a failed project 5 years prior, which had been abandoned because the alloy was found to be dangerously unstable. Omnitech hadn't developed a revolutionary new material. They had simply taken Sterling's old, failed research, rebranded it, and fabricated the testing data to hide its fatal flaws. Preston was either complicit in the fraud, or he was a fool so blinded by his desire for a quick victory that he had accepted miraculous results without an ounce of due diligence. Either way, he was unfit to lead. Compiling the report was like assembling a legal case. Every claim was backed by an appendix of raw data, every conclusion supported by a mountain of evidence. She included the damning emails, the falsified utility records, her own failure simulation models, and a final chilling projection. If Project Chimera went into production, Sterling Dynamics would be liable for corporate manslaughter within the decade. She finished it the night before she sent it to Alistair. As she attached the encrypted file to the secure email, her hand trembled. This wasn't just a report. It was the torpedo that would sink Preston Caldwell. But it was more than that. It was a defense of her father's legacy. Her father believed that the purpose of the company was to build things that lasted, things that protected people. Preston saw it as a machine for generating personal wealth and power. Now standing on the terrace, the sounds of the gala a dull roar behind her, she felt a strange sense of peace. The fear and anxiety of the past 6 months had been replaced by a resolute calm. She was the unseen architect of the night's main event. Preston saw her as a nobody, a piece of irrelevant scenery. He was about to learn in the most public and humiliating way possible that the quietest people in the room are often the ones who hold all the power. The foundation he intended to build for himself was in fact a trap door, and she had just handed Alistair Sterling the lever to pull it. The gentle clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation subsided as the lights in the grand ballroom dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated the grand staircase where Alistair Sterling stood looking out over the assembled crowd. He looked every bit his 80 years, his frame thin and his face etched with the lines of a long and demanding life. Yet his eyes, when they swept the room, were as sharp and clear as they had ever been. A respectful hush fell over the audience. Preston Caldwell stood near the front, a perfectly calibrated expression of humble anticipation on his face. He exchanged a knowing glance with Lawrence Hayes and other keyboard members. This was it, the culmination of his life's work. The old king was about to anoint his successor. "Thank you all for coming." Alistair began, his voice surprisingly strong, amplified by the hall's acoustics. "Tonight we celebrate the future. We celebrate innovation. For 50 years, my partner David Vance and I, and later all of you, built Sterling Dynamics on a simple principle: integrity. The integrity of our materials, the integrity of our engineering, and the integrity of our people." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Rosalind stood near the back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could see the back of Preston's perfectly tailored suit, the confident set of his shoulders. "A company," Alistair continued, "is like a great skyscraper. People are dazzled by the height, by the gleaming facade, by the view from the top. They celebrate the architect who designs the spire. But the true strength, the true genius of the structure lies unseen deep in the earth. It lies in the foundation." Preston smiled wider. He interpreted this as a lead-in to his own visionary leadership. He saw himself as the new architect ready to build the spire even higher. "My partner David was a man of the foundation," Alistair said, his voice softening with emotion. "He believed that what you couldn't see was more important than what you could. He believed that shortcuts in the foundation, no matter how small, would inevitably bring the entire structure crashing down. From her vantage point, Rosalind saw Preston's smile tighten almost imperceptibly at the mention of her father. To him, David Vance was ancient history. As I prepared to step down, Alistair went on, his gaze sweeping the room. The board has been preoccupied with finding a new architect. Someone with a bold vision for the spire. We have heard dazzling presentations about new heights we can reach, about projects that promise to remake the company in a new, more profitable image. He looked directly towards Preston. Our COO, Preston Caldwell, has championed one such project, Project Chimera. He has presented it as our future, a gleaming new pinnacle for our skyscraper. And he has shown us data, beautiful data that promises unprecedented success. This was the moment. Preston straightened his tie, ready to be called to the stage. The reporters in the room raised their cameras. Alistair let the silence stretch for a beat, then another. His expression shifted, the kindly grandfatherly mask falling away to reveal the hardened steel of a man who had built an empire. "But I have always been a man of the foundation," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "So before we celebrate the new spire, I felt it was my duty to inspect the bedrock, to see if it could bear the weight of such ambition." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not following the expected script. Preston's confident posture began to stiffen. "What I found," Alistair said, his voice ringing with cold fury, "was not bedrock. I found sand. I found rot. I found a foundation not of integrity but of deception." Gasps echoed through the hall. Preston's face, which had been a mask of triumph, was now draining of all color. He looked wildly at Lawrence Hayes, who looked just as stunned. "I am a traditionalist," Alistair declared, his voice rising again. "I believe that before you anoint a new architect, you must be absolutely certain he hasn't planned to build his masterpiece on a lie. The time for celebrating facades is over. Tonight, we are going to talk about the truth." He looked out over the sea of shocked faces, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found her. Rosalind felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. He had set the stage. He had turned the spotlight from the gleaming spire to the dark, hidden foundation. The world was watching, holding its breath, and waiting for the final act he had so masterfully orchestrated. Preston Caldwell's coronation was about to become his execution. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, thick with shock and anticipation. Preston Caldwell stood frozen, the blood having drained from his face, leaving behind a pallid mask of disbelief. All eyes were on Alistair Sterling, who commanded the stage with the righteous anger of a betrayed king. Project Chimera. The project our COO has staked his and our company's reputation on is a fraud. Alistair stated each word a hammer blow. The alloy is dangerously unstable. The testing data was fabricated. The primary contractor, Omnitech, is a shell company set up to funnel a fraudulent concept back into this organization, a concept based on our own failed and discarded research. A collective gasp swept through the audience. Reporters were scribbling furiously. Lawrence Hayes and the other board members looked at Preston with expressions of horror and betrayal. The entire edifice of Preston's carefully constructed future was crumbling in real time. "How do I know this?" Alistair continued, his voice resonating with authority. "Because I did not trust the glossy presentations. I trusted in the principles on which this company was founded. I commissioned a full, independent, deep-level audit of the project. An audit conducted not by a committee of executives looking to confirm their own biases, but by one person. Someone with an unimpeachable understanding of material science, an unwavering commitment to the truth, and a deep personal connection to the foundational integrity of Sterling Dynamics." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the stunned faces past the C-suite executives, past the wealthy investors, until it settled once more on the woman in the simple blue dress standing in the shadows at the back of the room. This person worked for months in secret, chasing the truth through tangled webs of data and deceit. This person is the reason Sterling Dynamics is not at this very moment hurtling towards a catastrophic failure that would have destroyed our reputation, bankrupted our shareholders, and potentially cost human lives. Alistair raised his hand and pointed directly at Rosalind. Ladies and gentlemen, that person is here with us tonight. Would you please step forward, Ms. Rosalind Vance? It felt as though 1,000 spotlights had swiveled and focused on her. The crowd parted as if by magic, clearing a path from the back of the hall to the stage. For a moment she was paralyzed, the sheer overwhelming weight of the moment pressing down on her. Then she met Alistair's gaze, and in his eyes she saw not just the chairman, but the man who had promised her father he would always look out for her. He was keeping that promise. Her feet began to move, carrying her forward, her simple rented dress a stark contrast to the couture gowns that now seemed to shrink away from her. The whispers were deafening. "Who is she, Vance?" "Like David Vance." "That's the woman Preston called a nobody." That final comment, overheard from Beatrice Croft's direction, was the spark that ignited the steel in her spine. She was not a nobody. She was a Vance. She held her head high as she ascended the stairs to join Alistair on the stage. Preston stared at her, his face a contortion of confusion and rage. He saw the quiet analyst from R&D, the irrelevant girl he had publicly humiliated not an hour ago. He simply could not compute her presence on that stage. It was a glitch in his reality. "This is absurd," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "She's a junior analyst. This is some kind of senile fantasy." Alistair ignored him completely. He turned to Rosalind, his expression softening. "Your father would be so proud of you, my dear," he murmured for her ears only. Then he turned back to the microphone. "Mr. Caldwell is correct about one thing," Alistair announced. "Ms. Vance is an analyst. And as an analyst, she deals in facts, not fantasies. The fact is, her report, codenamed Legacy, has saved this company. The board will be receiving a copy tonight. I suspect the SEC and the Department of Justice will be interested in a copy as well." Preston staggered back as if he had been physically struck. The mention of the SEC was a death knell. "There has been a cancer growing in this company," Alistair's voice boomed. "A culture of ambition without integrity, of profit without principle. Tonight we cut it out. As of this moment, Mr. Caldwell is terminated from his position as COO and is barred from Sterling Dynamics property pending a full investigation. Security will escort you out." Two grim-faced men in dark suits materialized and moved towards a stunned Preston, who could only sputter incoherently as they took his arms. The last image the crowd had of Preston Caldwell III was of his face contorted in impotent fury as he was unceremoniously marched out of the gala, his legacy reduced to a single humiliating exit. Alistair let the shock settle before delivering his final stunning proclamation. "I said tonight was about the future. I am stepping down as chairman effective immediately. The board has been seeking a new visionary, a new architect. They were looking in the wrong place. The future of this company is not about a taller spire. It's about rebuilding the foundation. It requires a leader who understands substance over style, data over dogma, and integrity over everything." He placed a hand on Rosalind's shoulder. "Therefore, it is my greatest honor and the last official act of my career to announce the new Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Dynamics, Ms. Rosalind Vance." If the room had been silent before, it was now a vacuum. The shock was so profound, it was almost tangible. Then a single person began to clap. It was one of the company's oldest engineers, a man who had worked with her father. Then another joined in, and another, until the entire hall erupted in a tidal wave of applause. It wasn't the polite, curated applause of a corporate event. It was a genuine, thunderous roar of approval, a release of tension, a celebration of a revolution. Rosalind Vance, the nobody, stood on the stage, bathed in the warm light, the sound of her new world washing over her. She was terrified, overwhelmed, but beneath it all, she felt the unshakable certainty of her father's legacy, a foundation of integrity that was now hers to build upon. The morning after the gala, The business world was in an uproar. The headlines were sensational. Sterling shake-up nobody. Analyst named CEO coup ousted in gala drama. The Vance legacy. David Vance's daughter takes the helm at Sterling Dynamics. Wall Street was in a state of controlled panic, with Sterling's stock price initially plummeting in pre-market trading due to the uncertainty. Pundits on every financial network were asking the same question: who was Rosalind Vance? But inside the imposing glass and steel of Sterling Tower, a different kind of energy was taking hold. The news of Preston's fraudulent project and subsequent firing had spread like wildfire. For the engineers, the researchers, and the long-serving employees who had felt marginalized by Preston's slash-and-burn corporate philosophy, it felt like a liberation. Rosalind arrived at the executive floor at 7 a.m. sharp. She wore not a ball gown but a simple dark gray pantsuit that projected quiet authority. The hushed, opulent offices of the C-suite felt alien to her. As she walked towards the CEO's corner office, Alistair's office heads popped out of doorways, whispering, staring. She ignored them, her focus singular. Her first meeting was with the board of directors, the same people who just 24 hours earlier had been ready to rubber-stamp Preston as their leader. They were gathered around the massive mahogany table, their expressions a mixture of apprehension, embarrassment, and grudging respect. Lawrence Hayes, looking 10 years older, sat at the head of the table. Rosalind didn't wait for them to speak. She placed a single-bound copy of her legacy report in the center of the table. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and even, betraying none of the nervousness she felt. "Everything you need to know about the state of our company's most ambitious project is in that report. But that is the past. I am here to talk about the future." She didn't berate them for their lack of oversight or their blind faith in Preston. Instead, she laid out a new vision. It wasn't flashy. There were no buzzwords like synergy or disruption. She spoke of reinvesting in fundamental research and development, of rebuilding their internal testing and quality assurance divisions, the very departments Preston had gutted. She talked about creating a new corporate culture of transparency, where bad news travels faster than good news and where employees on the factory floor are empowered to raise red flags without fear of reprisal. She spoke her father's language, the language of integrity, quality, and long-term vision. "Sterling Dynamics became great because we built things the world could trust," she concluded. "My mission is to restore that trust both inside and outside this company. I will not be the CEO who promises you the highest stock price next quarter. I will be the CEO who ensures this company is still a global leader 50 years from now. I need to know if this board shares that vision." One by one, the board members, humbled and faced with the undeniable truth of her report, pledged their support. The revolution that had begun at the gala was now being ratified in the boardroom. Her next act was an all-hands email sent to every single employee of Sterling Dynamics worldwide. It announced an immediate halt to Project Chimera and the launch of a full, transparent internal investigation. More importantly, it announced the creation of the David Vance Innovation Grant, a massive new fund dedicated to nurturing the kind of long-term foundational R&D her father had championed. Later that afternoon, she walked through the R&D labs on the 14th floor, her old department. The analysts and engineers who had once been her peers looked at her with awe. She wasn't a remote, intimidating figure like Preston. She stopped, asked about their projects, listened to their concerns about budget cuts, and understood their technical challenges. She was one of them. She was a builder, not a banker. As dusk settled over Manhattan, Rosalind stood alone in the CEO's office. The city lights twinkled below like a field of scattered diamonds. On the corner of the vast desk, a single object had been left for her. It was the old framed photograph of her father and Alistair, which Alistair had retrieved from her apartment. Tucked into the frame was a handwritten note from the old man. "The foundation is yours now, Rosie. Build something that lasts. A.S." A sense of profound, daunting responsibility settled over her, but it was not a burden. It was a purpose. Preston Caldwell had called her a nobody. In his world of glittering surfaces and hollow promises, perhaps she was. But in the world that mattered, the world of substance, truth, and legacy, she was finally truly somebody. She was the CEO. And she was just getting started. The first 72 hours of Rosalind Vance's tenure as CEO were not spent celebrating. They were spent in a brutal hand-to-hand fight with perception. On the morning of her third day, the stock of Sterling Dynamics ticker SDX was in freefall. Wall Street abhors two things above all else: fraud and uncertainty. Rosalind had just delivered both. The Chimera scandal was a gaping wound, and her sudden, unprecedented appointment was the salt being poured into it. The consensus among the pinstriped analysts of Lower Manhattan was that an emotional 80-year-old chairman had, in a fit of sentimentality, handed a multi-billion-dollar global corporation to an unqualified and unknown lab technician. Her first major test was scheduled for 10 a.m., an emergency investor call. It was to be her introduction to the people who, on paper, at least now owned the company she was tasked to lead. The key is reassurance, Rosalind. The speaker was Garrett Thorne, the executive VP of Global Strategy, and a slick, polished holdover from Preston's inner circle. He had the kind of deep tan that suggested weekends in the Hamptons, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had cornered her in the boardroom as she was reviewing her notes. They don't want to hear about R&D budgets or 5-year plans. They want to hear the words share buyback, dividend increase, and aggressive Q4 forecast. You give them a strong, confident vision of immediate growth and the stock will stabilize. We can clean up the Chimera mess behind the scenes. Rosalind looked up from her tablet, her gaze steady. Garrett's advice was the siren song of the modern corporate world, the very philosophy that had led the company to the brink. It was the echo of Preston's voice lingering in the chambers of power. The Chimera mess is not a mess to be cleaned up behind the scenes, Garrett. She stated, her tone devoid of warmth. It's a symptom of a disease. You don't hide a disease, you cure it. And the cure is transparency. My forecast for Q4 is going to be conservative. I'm freezing all executive bonuses until our internal audit is complete, and I'm diverting that capital to the David Vance grant and to a full review of our quality control protocols across all divisions. Garrett stared at her, his jaw tight. That's unconventional. The street will crucify you. You're telling them we're slamming on the brakes. I'm telling them we're checking the integrity of the engine before we try to break any speed records, she countered. Thank you for your input, Garrett. It was a clear dismissal. He gave a tight nod and exited the room, but Rosalind knew this was only the first of many battles she would have to fight against the company's embedded culture of short-term thinking. At precisely 10 a.m., she sat at the head of the vast empty boardroom table, a single microphone in front of her. On the other end of the line were hundreds of the world's most powerful financial analysts and investors. She took a breath, pressed the button to go live, and began. After a brief factual statement about the immediate termination of Project Chimera and the ongoing investigation, she opened the floor to questions. The attack was immediate. Ms. Vance Adam Schofield, J.P. Morgan. Your background is in R&D. You have 0 C-suite experience and no formal financial management training. Can you tell us why the board believes you are qualified to right a sinking ship? Rosalind didn't flinch. Mr. Schofield, you're correct. I'm not a financial engineer. I'm an actual engineer. This company doesn't have a financial problem. It has a product problem, born from a crisis of integrity. The ship isn't sinking because of a faulty balance sheet. It was taking on water because our former COO tried to build a flagship out of defective materials. My qualification is that I know the difference between a solid foundation and a fraudulent facade. I can read a materials stress report as well as I can read a P&L statement, and right now the former is far more important to the long-term health of this company. The next question was just as sharp. Rebecca Ferris, Goldman Sachs. You're talking about long-term health, but our clients are concerned about their portfolios tomorrow. Your plan to divert capital from bonuses to R&D sounds noble, but it suggests a significant hit to short-term profitability. Can you guarantee to your shareholders that you're not sacrificing their investment on the altar of sentimentality? Thank you, Rebecca. Rosalind replied, her voice firm. Let me be clear. Investment in R&D and quality control is not a sacrifice. It is the single most important investment we can make. It is the engine of our future profitability. Every dollar we spend ensuring our products are the most reliable and advanced on the planet is a dollar that builds our brand, secures long-term contracts, and prevents the kind of catastrophic brand-destroying failure that Project Chimera would have become. The greatest threat to shareholder value at this company is not a conservative quarter. It was the culture of cutting corners to create the illusion of value. That culture ends today. Your investment is safer with us building real trustworthy products than it was last week when we were preparing to sell a lie. She continued for an hour, taking every hostile question and turning it into a lesson on her new philosophy. She was calm, precise, and relentlessly on message. She didn't use jargon or make promises she couldn't keep. She spoke with the unshakable authority of someone who knew her subject better than anyone else in the world. In his office on the 50th floor, Lawrence Hayes, the chairman of the board, listened to the entire call on speakerphone, his eyes closed. He had been one of Preston's biggest champions, seduced by his charisma and bold projections. He had been ready to hedge his bets on Rosalind to give her a short leash. But listening to her now, he heard something he hadn't heard in a boardroom in 20 years, the truth spoken plainly and without fear. He heard the echoes of a young Alistair Sterling and David Vance. She wasn't just saving the company. She was reminding him of why he had invested in it in the first place. When the call ended, Rosalind disconnected and sat back, the silence of the room flooding in. A wave of exhaustion washed over her. She felt the immense weight of the thousands of jobs, the billions in capital, and the legacy that now rested squarely on her shoulders. She hadn't won over all her critics. The stock was still volatile, but she had drawn her line in the sand. The door to the boardroom opened. It was Lawrence Hayes. He walked over and stood before her, his expression unreadable. "That was the most honest investor call I've ever heard," he said simply, "and probably the most costly in the short term." Rosalind met his gaze. It was necessary. A slow smile spread across his face. "Yes, it was. Alistair was right about you. You're not the leader we thought we wanted, Ms. Vance, but you are clearly the leader we need." He extended his hand. "The board is with you, unanimously. Now let's go build something that lasts." And so the reign of the architect of facades came to a crashing end, not with a bang, but with the quiet, undeniable truth brought to light by a woman they dared to call a nobody. Rosalind Vance's story is a powerful reminder that true power isn't always found in the loudest voice or the most prominent position. Sometimes it's forged in the quiet dedication to principles, in the courage to speak truth to power, and in the unwavering belief in one's own worth, even when the world tries to render you invisible. Her journey from the shadows of an R&D department to the CEO's chair wasn't just a promotion. It was a restoration of the very soul of her company. What did you think of Rosalind's incredible rise and Preston's dramatic fall? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of underdog triumph and corporate justice, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.